Good evening, everyone, and welcome once again to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert from Northern Virginia, and it's good to be back after a short hiatus where I just finished a knee reconstruction surgery courtesy of the United States Army, although I do have to say they did a very good job. So I'm glad to be back. For those of you that have been watching the show, you know that normally we highlight a veteran each week on the show and share their experiences and their stories. But tonight, we're going to do something a little different, and I'll get to that in just a moment. But first, I do want to take a moment to thank our two great sponsors to our Veterans Show, Quest Jewelers of Merrifield, Virginia. We talk about Quest every show. And for those of you that are looking for something special for that special someone, you can contact Pete or Wantain from Quest Jewelers in Merrifield, Virginia, and they can help you get it. I also want to thank Nationwide IT Services. Nationwide IT is a veteran-owned service-disabled small business. And I want to thank CK Park and his crew for their great sponsorship to our show. So if you have a business that's in need of professional consulting services, whether it's IT training management, 360-degree assessments, whatever you're looking for, CK and his crew can help you do it. So again, thank you to our two wonderful sponsors. So I want to talk just for a second tonight about the show. And as I said, we are doing something a little different tonight. And rather than having a guest on, I've actually invited Cece Shatz, who is our network president and host of a number of the shows, to sit in with me. And there she is. How you doing, Cece?
Hey, I'm doing pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, no, this is great because I as I talk to you, I wanted to do something a little different. And for the audience, what I wanted to do tonight was take a little time and have a conversation with Cece about veterans' perspective. And when I talk about veterans' perspective, I'm talking about, what we as veterans, and I don't claim, of course, to be the know-all, end-all for every veteran, because everyone has their own little views and opinions. But I can tell you from a lot of my guests and other veterans I know, I wanted to take some time to share a veteran's perspective about not only, the military service, and a number of other topics with our audience. And I think Cece would be a good person to discuss that with because she has a number of veterans in her family, including her father and her son. So she's been around that neck of the woods for a little while. So Cece, as I said, we get started here. Just feel free to jump right in and we'll try and share what we can with listeners.
Well, I often thought about why you serve, because these guys like you said, my father, my son, I have several uncles that were in the service. Some of course were drafted. We'll say some of them were drafted. Some of them, like my son, volunteered. And so why it just, veterans are just so unique, they're so special. And so why would they serve? Why do they have that feeling of serving our country?
Well, it's interesting you ask that because if you talk to different veterans, you're going to hear different reasons, of course. I actually served with a young soldier in my first duty station in Korea way back in 1981. And I'm kind of, telling my age here. But I had a guy that I served with there, and he served because he thought it was his family tradition. He had a father that served in Vietnam, and he had a grandfather that served in the Korean War. And he also had a great-grandfather that served in World War II. So going all the way back as far as he could remember, he had always had a member of his family serving in the military. So he thought it was that was one of his family traditions. The young men all served in the military. So that's not that unusual. You see that a lot when you talk with veterans where they'll talk about how, they saw their father's service or their grandfather's service and that type of stuff. But on the, the kind of flip side, like you said, some people were drafted into it. I know a guy that was drafted in Vietnam, and he actually spent a year tour in Vietnam as an infantryman. So you can imagine what he was exposed to.
Yes.
And when I was in my tour in Korea, and this was my first tour, I saw him walk into the barracks one day. He was a new guy. And I said, well, this guy looks a little old to be a sergeant, a Sergeant E5. Started talking with him, come to find out that was his history. He was a member of the 173rd Airborne Brigade in Vietnam. He was an infantryman. And as I looked at his those were the old OD green uniforms, way back in the day. And I noticed that he also had a combat medics badge above his combat infantry. With his combat infantry badge. And I said, well, wait a minute. I said, you're wearing a combat medics badge. He goes, yeah. He said, I came back after a year in Vietnam, was trying to decide what I wanted to do. He said, I got retrained as a medic and I volunteered to go back as a combat medic. So, you hear it all. For me, and this is a number of other people, for me, it was a curiosity thing, because I mentioned on the show before, my father was killed when I was 5 in an Army training accident. So I had this curiosity about the military. And when I joined, it was as much out of curiosity as anything else. So when I enlisted, I had no idea how long I was going to stay. And so you hear all of this. You get people that talk about patriotism. You had that big rash of enlistees that joined up after 9/11 because there were people that thought it was their patriotic duty to defend the country. Look at the football player Chris Tillman out of Phoenix, playing professional football for the Phoenix Cardinals. Had a wonderful, high-paying professional football career. He gave it up. Trained as an Army Ranger, went off to combat, and he was actually killed. But he felt that was his patriotic duty. So you kind of see it all. But I have to share one other one with you too, and the reason why is because this one kind of struck me, and it struck me in a nerve in the wrong way. And I think you'll understand when I tell you why. When I was stationed in Germany with 2nd Armored Cav. We, of course, were called up to deploy to Desert Storm. And so naturally, all the soldiers, I had a platoon of about 18 soldiers. And as we were getting ready to deploy, I had one soldier in my platoon who started trying to bring up the idea that he didn't want to deploy. He was trying to back out of his responsibilities. And he tried to come up with every reason that you could imagine why he should not deploy. Well, we took him over to the desert anyway, and we still continued this while we were prepping to go out into the desert itself. And finally, I told the commander, I said, look, sir, we got to make a decision with this guy, because I've got a whole platoon I'm responsible for to take care of. I can't be dealing with this and babysitting someone who doesn't want to be here. So one of his reasons was, well, I signed up so I could get college benefits to go to college. And, the question was, well, didn't you think you were have to volunteer to give up something in return? What were you expecting? So, like I said, of course, you can imagine he lost the respect of the entire platoon. He would have been ostracized anyway. So they did end up sending him back to Europe. They chaptered him out of the Army, put him out of the Army. But so you can see what I mean. You kind of run the gamut of reasons why people will serve. Some will serve for very honorable, very good reasons. And then again, you will have those few that come in for the wrong reason. And when things don't work out their way, they want out. But overwhelmingly, the people, the veterans that you see serve all want to be there for some reason or another. And it makes you very proud to be part of that type of, how can I say, I don't want to call it a fraternity or a sorority mix or whatever you want to, but to be part of that brotherhood is kind of, it makes you proud when you see why, all the different reasons that these people join.
Yeah. I remember we had a guest on, you had a guest on that he had said something like that he was looking for, like a connection, to be a part of something.
Yeah.
Maybe something bigger than himself,
Yes.
And so, yeah, I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing to talk to some of the veterans and, just get their stories as to why you joined. But those reasons I just spent the last 5 or 6 minutes telling you about, those seem to be the prevailing ones, that I ran into and that I still run into. But, the interesting thing about it is when you join, no matter how many videos, movies, films you watch about it, pamphlets you look at, you never know what to expect until you arrive. So I have to tell you, once you make that decision that you want to join, you want to serve your country, whatever reason it is, then comes the next step where you enter that world. And, I still remember I took my basic training at Fort Sill, Oklahoma in February. As you can imagine, it were cold. So, we got there in the middle of the night, hadn't had much sleep. They have us standing out in the cold. We finally get in and sit down and, they start, you can imagine. Now, I will say this, when you get to the reception station, at least back in my day, they treated you a little bit nicer than the drill sergeants did when you actually got to your drill platoon. So, of course, you go in, you go through your several days of orientation, getting your shots, getting your haircut. Oh, the haircut was interesting. And that was still back in 1980. So we still had a number of guys with long hair. And I tell you, they were shocked when they came out of there and felt their heads. But, you go through all of that. And I have to tell you, I thought when we went through the reception station, I thought to myself, this isn't so bad. Well, little did I know, and I'm sure your dad may have told you some stories. Your son may have told you some stories. But when we got on that bus and they bussed us from the reception station to my basic training platoon, there I was. And I said, I'm going to make the best of this. I'm going to do my best to remain anonymous, do what I'm told, learn everything I'm supposed to learn, and just get through without drawing attention to myself. Well, we got there. The drill sergeant got on the bus and, of course, then started the yelling. Get off my bus. You got 10 seconds and 7 of them are already gone. Some of the stuff you see in the movies, right? and so we all were fighting to get off the bus. And I got off the bus and I'm dragging 2 duffel bags and another small flight bag full of stuff. And I'm running down the sidewalk where they're yelling at us to go. And I get about 20 or 30 yards down the sidewalk. And all of a sudden I hear a voice from behind me, "Private Holbert." And I stopped there. I went, holy crap. How in the heck does somebody know my name here already? And I stopped, of course. And I turned around and I looked. And there was this mean looking drill sergeant. And I said, "Yes, sergeant." He said, "Come here." And I said, oh, God. I'm trying to figure out how this guy knew my name already. Hadn't even. So there went my anonymity out the window quickly. I run up there to him and he asked me, he said, "Are you trying to pollute my grass?" I had no idea what he was talking about. "No, drill sergeant. What are you doing with trash on my one of my name tags had fallen off my bag and on the grass.
That's how he knew your name.
So that's how he knew, and that's how it started. So, you watch all this, and I don't know, did your son share any kind of stories like that with you from
Oh
his
yeah,
experience?
he kept asking for Ziploc bags, and I kept thinking, why do you need so many Ziploc bags? Well, he said they put everything in Ziploc bags because they just come in and start spraying and cleaning,
Yeah.
and if it's not zipped up, it's wet. It gets wet. All their stuff gets wet. Yeah, it's like a whole nother world. It's a whole nother world. It's not Mama's house, that's for sure.
Oh, it's definitely not mama's house when you get in there, and pray to God when you leave in the morning for training that you didn't forget to lock up something and come
Yeah.
back in the afternoon or the evening and find your stuff thrown all over the room or all down the stairs because one of the drill sergeants went in there and found your wall locker or your foot locker unlocked. So yeah, I mean, it was an eye-opening experience, but as you go through that, you look at it and you say, this is how they mold soldiers.
Mhm.
This is how they create discipline. This is how they create camaraderie and teamwork. And of course, that's what it's all designed to do. It's sure not a fun way to do it, but it's one of those things that they do. And so this is basically where they introduce the discipline, the military discipline, create those camaraderies, create those relationships. Because I can tell you, when we got to basic training, there were people there from all over. There were different nationalities, different colors, you name it. Nobody cared. We were all one group, one team. They instilled us to work together, and that's where they begin to instill that in you. And if you look at the military today, for the most part, you're still going to find that same dedication to one another.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
this is where it all starts. And with all of the training and the different things we went through, I have to tell you, it was an incredible experience. Road marches until your feet are bloody. I mean, and I have to share something with you that's kind of hilarious here. Is that occasionally, when we were lucky, they would come and truck us out to one of the training areas or to the rifle range. And they pulled up the first time in this truck that was pulling this open bed. Well, it looked just like a cattle car. The door opened up and you just piled in and you stood, belly to back, crammed in there. You stood for the whole ride. So, of course, soldiers being soldiers, what did we start doing? We said, yeah, this is the cattle car. So we started mooing the whole time when they were carting us back and forth. You could hear everybody mooing going down the road. So, you can just imagine some of the situations you find yourself in, when you're going through some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember when my son Billy had gotten, out of the service. And one thing I noticed that he talked so loud,
Uh,
like his voice is like, and then he would do the yes sir and he would
yeah,
do that all the time. It's like
yeah.
it's a deep voice, and I mean across the room that voice would go. Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna share one other thing there about the introduction to the military and the training. And even though I could sit here and tell you stories all night.
Yeah, tell me something about that. Like, I was making some notes here about the mud puddle. What is the mud?
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
The mud puddle mayhem, I call it. So, I told you soldiers tend to have this weird sense of humor, especially when they're put in these types of positions. And so my platoon, I was in second platoon, and we nicknamed ourselves the Animals. Well, the drill sergeants thought the name was good. They thought it was cute. But we were coming back from the rifle range one afternoon, and they had cattle carted us out there. So we got to move all the way going out there, but we were walking back, and it was about 4 miles. So it was, a nice little stroll. The only difference is you're carrying crap on your back and a rifle. And anyway, as we got a little closer to our barracks area, we hit this spot in the trail where there was a huge, huge mud puddle. And it was probably about a foot and a half deep. And of course, it was as wide as the trail. So when we got to it, everybody slowed down. Our drill sergeant naturally started in on us. What are you slowing down for? Why? There ain't nothing in your way. He said, you guys call yourself the animals. You have not earned that yet. I want to see you earn that. So as soon as he got that out of his mouth, our training platoon leader, I can't remember his name now, who it was at the time, turned around and looked at all of us and he says, okay, head first in the puddle. So there you had an entire platoon, training platoon, took off screaming, got to the puddle and dove head first into the puddle and then low crawled across the puddle and got out the other side. So naturally, we still had about probably close to another mile to march back, soaking wet, full of mud. So we called that the mud puddle mayhem. But I mean, the training experience, the indoctrination into the military, as I said, is designed to create not only that discipline, but that camaraderie and that teamwork among, the members of the unit. So what I'd like to do, though, Cece, when we come back, is I want to elaborate just a little bit on that leadership. So for those of you watching, we're going to take a break for just a minute, and we'll be right back with Cece to continue our discussion. All right, welcome back, everyone, and you are listening to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network Veterans Corner, and I'm here with Cece Shatz tonight, and we've been discussing veterans' experience and perspective. And Cece, before the break, you had mentioned that you noticed your son had come back and he talked loud, and there were changes about him and those types of things. So I want to ask you though, did you notice any difference in, how can I say, the discipline that he may have had, or the idea of leadership or discipline? Did you notice anything different?
Oh, yeah. I think it was self-confidence.
Yeah.
He had a tremendous amount of, he always did. He was always kind of that way anyhow, but he had a tremendous amount of self-confidence and definitely, leadership. And I think even today he's in a form of serving our country in a leadership type of form, even though he's a civilian. But definitely grown up. He wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, he still is fun and laughs and a really good side with him, but definitely matured. And understands the importance of life. So it taught him a great deal.
Well, and the reason why I asked, because what you just told me is exactly what I saw.
Mm-hmm.
You go in. I was a young guy. I was right at 21 because I went to college for a couple of years before I went in. And in fact, that was another endearing title I got when I was in basic training. I actually went in as a PFC, 2 grades higher than most of the other guys because I had an associate degree. And the drill sergeants loved to call me college boy. So that was one way they addressed me on occasion. But, even though I was a couple years older than most of our platoon, in fact, myself and one other soldier who was in with me, we were both 21 and we were considered to be the old men of the bunch. Mm. But you notice even amongst those young soldiers, as I mentioned earlier, when you start that training, they begin to instill that discipline into you, the teamwork into you. And the one thing I have to tell you, in addition to the discipline, one thing that the military will pound into you is your responsibility of leadership. And, that was something that they started from the very beginning. To give you an example, I still remember we were in the reception area and we were going to get shots. And that was back when they were giving shots with the air guns in the arm. And yeah, you can imagine that. And so there were guys in there getting numerous shots, and we were all standing around in a room, and there was a young guy next to me. The shot caused him to pass out. Well, he passed out. I just mentioned, I just saw him out of the corner of my eye, reached out with my arm and tried to catch him as he was going down. He still hit the ground kind of hard. Man, the drill sergeant come running up. He started screaming at the rest of those guys in the room. And I didn't know whether I had done right or not, but he was screaming at them. He said, "What are you all going to do? Stand back and just let another fellow soldier hit the ground and hurt themselves? You have a responsibility to look out for one." And he just lit into everyone. Mm-hmm. And that's where it started. That responsibility to look out for one another, the leadership that they taught. And, we had mottos all over the military, and it was always like mission first, people always. Mm-hmm. And that was the type of thing it was. So, I spent my career as a non-commissioned officer and NCO. And I'll tell you, that was one of the top parts of our creed, is that we were responsible for not only ourselves, but the mission, but we had total responsibility for the welfare of the soldiers that we led. And that's something I have to say that is probably one of the proudest things that I learned in the military. You have to be the strong one. You have to be the leader. You have to be able to take charge when things are wrong, when things are bad. And, it's something that in order to be a successful military person, you just have to learn to do. And like I said, I imagine, you probably saw some of those traits in your son. Your dad, I'm sure, probably talked a little bit about the leadership that he learned and some of the things that he was taught when he was in, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was in Korea. So, yeah. So he definitely, there was a lot of things he experienced, and you just have to move forward, move in, and yeah. So,
it's just, to this day, and, I'll share with you, when I was deployed to the desert, as I said, I had a large platoon. We had armored tracks, and we were the only ones that had armored tracks for our unit. So we formed the nucleus of the perimeter to protect the rest of the unit in a big V formation when we were traveling. And so when we crossed into Iraq, I had our final briefing with with our command, and my first sergeant came up and he asked me, he said, okay, he said, who's your point track? And I said, well, I am. And he looked at me, he says, well, you realize you're the platoon sergeant. He said, you're the number 7 track. He said, you're supposed to be to the rear and on the left. And I told him, I said, yeah, but first sergeant, I said, how can I ask somebody else to ride point if I won't do it myself? Mm. And I mean, that's, and I'm not saying that to try and make myself look good, but that's what they taught us. Mm-hmm. And so that's what you did without thinking about it. As a first sergeant, and I love being a first sergeant. I love being able to work with the soldiers and harass my soldiers. That was always fun. But you always did it in a good way to teach them a lesson. But I have to tell you, as a first sergeant, one of the number one responsibilities that sergeant major looked to you for is that you were responsible for the health and welfare of my 135 soldiers I had in my company. So, on field exercises and deployments when I was a first sergeant, there were mornings I was up at 3:00, got my driver up. We loaded my Humvee full of hot food and Mermite cans, and we might have had soldiers set up in 3 or 4 different locations. But I guarantee you, before 7:00 in the morning, we had visited all of those locations and fed all those soldiers hot food. My NCOs knew they did not eat until all of their soldiers ate. So it was, it's just that, how can I say, that leadership, that discipline that the military instills in you. And if you talk to a lot of veterans, you're going to hear them talk about the same thing. A lot of them, those old military habits bleed right over into their civilian lives, whether they retire or, so does your son still talk loud?
Yeah, he still talks loud. I mean, he's not as bad as he was, because we were like, all of us, I know my daughter and I both, we kind of looked at each other like, whoa. But yeah, he was pretty loud, but he's got a good, and he's like me, we've got a booming voice. But one thing I will say is about the leadership too. And I'm hoping he'll come on and be a guest on the show. But I used to tell him, whatever you do, like you said, don't keep low profile. Don't volunteer for anything. Just do your time. Get out. Just don't do anything that's dangerous. And and I say, just don't volunteer. And I talked to him, and he'd say, "Oh, I volunteer for this, Mom, and I volunteer for that." I said, "What did Mom tell you?" Mom said, "Don't volunteer." But he was always one to have his hand up first. Yeah.
Well, and to be honest with you, the way they train you, the camaraderie that you have with your fellow military folks, that starts to come natural for you. You want to do it so other people don't have to. Mm-hmm. And when you start thinking about, that leadership, that responsibility for, that's a lot of responsibility. A lot of military members, as they go up in rank, it's a lot of responsibility for one person. Mm-hmm. When even me as a first sergeant, when I had 135 people, I was responsible for everything that happened to those 135 people, whether they got fed, whether they received medical attention, whether they were getting paid, no matter what it was my responsibility. And, when the military does that to you, the training you go through, not only is it mental, but it's physical. So you go through a lot of physical torture, torment, and training to make you physically strong. And you get to where you don't want to admit when you're struggling. You don't want to admit when you have flaws. You keep them to yourself. You don't want to admit, you hate to admit when you need help. But the thing is, a smart leader will always know when they need help and seek it out. So that's where you have to draw that line. And the reason why I say that is because I kind of want to share this a little bit, especially for some of the other veterans out there. And this kind of morphs into some of the struggles that you encounter. And this actually alludes a little more to later in your career, or after you've left the military, or after, you've retired. And I mean, Cece, my time in the military was some of the best time in my life. I would never, I don't have any regrets about, what I did, the time I spent in. But as I retired and I got a little older, and you're aware some of this, that I was diagnosed with PTSD about 3 years ago, and I struggled with it for the longest time, but I've been getting help with it, and it's helped a lot. My wife has been wonderful with all the things that I've been struggling with, but I did not want to admit I needed help. I could not bring myself to admit that I needed help, and I couldn't do it by myself. And I have to say, if there's a flaw in that training, I think it instills it in a lot of us so deeply that you have to kind of unlearn that as you get older. Because, I've struggled with PTSD. I've struggled with injuries to my feet and my knees. Like I was saying at the outset, I just, had a knee replacement. Mm-hmm. I had foot surgery 2 years ago because of damage from my military career. I'm facing knee replacement on my left knee probably in about 3 months. And I did not want to admit that I needed help. I did not want to admit that I couldn't do things anymore like I used to. And it took my wife to really push me, talk to me, and tell me, you need to get help. There's nothing wrong with getting help. There's nothing wrong with asking for help. These are things you can't do anything about. You were injured, and it took the longest time. And I think, the military installs that level of ownership for what we are and what we have, and discipline and leadership into us so well that I think a lot of us do struggle when we get out, being able to let go of some of that and admit there's things we can no longer do, and admit when we need the help. And that's when it becomes important for you guys listening, and gals, I'm sorry, for you men and women listening out there as veterans or family members for that matter. That's when it becomes important to make sure that you speak up. If you're a veteran and you're struggling, that's when it becomes very important for you to seek help. Because there's no shame in asking for help. There's no shame in looking for help. And Cece, I know that your father has gotten older, and I know that he's had his struggles. Some of it may be related to his military time.
Oh, I'm sure.
So, but did you ever have that issue with him to get help?
Yeah, but I wonder if it's being a man too.
That could be.
But how stubborn you guys are. You won't ask for directions. You're certainly not going to ask for help to go when you start feeling bad. But I wanted to just say is that it is remarkable the benefits that the VA offers. That for veterans to be able to, if they need help, there's a tremendous amount of benefits available, and to take advantage of those. I hear a lot of veterans complain about not getting services or whatever, but I will tell you that, there is a tremendous amount of benefits and services that they provide if you just go in and ask for it, if you just go in and say what your problem is. And I tell you, as civilians, we don't have it. We don't have that kind of help. And so take advantage of the services that they have. And mostly the individuals there at the VA have always been extremely helpful, wanting to help. All you have to do is just say what your problem is. And if they don't have the answer, they'll direct you to the one that does. And so you just don't give up, get the help you need.
Well, and along those lines too, another point is for those veterans who are retired, I've heard a lot of people complain about not wanting to go to a military hospital. Of course, as a retiree, I use the Army hospital up here in Northern Virginia. And I've had 2 surgeries there. I even had a pretty serious, life-threatening blood clot that my wife took me to the emergency room for, that they admitted me and treated me. And, I have to tell you, the level of care that they have given me at that military hospital has just been incredible. I mean, they make you feel like you're worth something. Mm-hmm. So, the VA, the military hospitals, for those of you who are able to use them, I strongly encourage you to make use of those resources if you need the help. Despite that evolution of leadership that's drummed into you, folks, I'm going to tell you, it's not worth struggling over. And I had to learn that the hard way. And I finally learned it, and I'm finally going through the things that I needed to go through.
Yeah. So I'm glad you are. I'm glad you are, Paul.
Yeah.
Come around. Because, your body is telling you one thing. Your mind's telling you one thing. It's something else. And your body is saying to you, come on, Paul. you need certain things. And as we get older, our bodies do start breaking down. And, you guys have been both, guys and gals in the service. You've experienced probably more things than what we civilians have. And so definitely, take advantage of the services. And my dad was in and out of the hospital all the time, VA. You couldn't ask for better doctors. And I was always amazed at, I would ask some of the doctors, why are you here? Why are you here at the VA? Because I would imagine they could probably make more money, in the other sector. And most of them felt they wanted to serve. This was a way of serving. And so, and they made good money. It's not like they weren't making bad money, but they felt they were wanting to serve. And so with each patient, they felt that they were doing their part. So I thought that was pretty commendable. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And, Cece, I got to tell you, I am definitely enjoying this conversation with you. But I notice we're about out of time.
Oh, look at the time.
So,
how young I am.
Flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? But you know what? I'm gonna ask you to come back for another.
Oh, I would love to.
Another episode, so we can continue the conversation. Because there's still a lot more things that I think we can share with our audience. So, like I said, I'm going to ask you to come back for another edition so we can continue the discussion. And I really appreciate having you on. So I'm going to ask if you would take a second to pull up our veterans information for us for the screen for today. Yeah, so this, and for those of you who are out there, the Veterans Legacy Program, this is an excellent program to where teachers, and not just teachers, but other community leaders can go and get education programs, tours, and other things to teach their students and their groups about the VHA operations, the cemetery program, just about the VHA in general, what the Veterans Health Administration does, how the cemeteries are run, the services the cemeteries offer for our nation's veterans. So it's a learning program. So I really encourage you, the Legacy program is out there for your use. So any of the teachers we may have out there that want to introduce their students to some of the things that our veterans have and experience, there's your website on the bottom. But if you go to the va.gov and look for the Legacy program, you'll be able to pull it up and find it. So I encourage you definitely, for those of you that would like to do that, share some of that information with your students or those groups where you may be looking for an activity. And Cece, thank you again for coming on this evening. And I want you to come back. And for those of you out there listening in our audience, we want to thank you for listening to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Network Veterans Corner. For those veterans out there, in our discussion, we want to thank you so much for your service and all that you've done for the country. Know that you're appreciated. Know that the help is out there. Again, I can't stress enough, as Cece and I were talking about, the help is there for you. So don't be afraid to reach out for it. And we hope that you will be able to live your best life. So Cece, with that, I think we will say goodnight until our next show where we can continue the conversation.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you very much, Paul. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you for being on.
Bye. Good night, everyone.